Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On our program today, we're going to be talking about something that many of us try to pursue and chase and sometimes find tremendously elusive, and that is happiness. What is it exactly? And are there those outside forces that once we attain them make us permanently happy? Why is it that we hear that people who win big lotteries find themselves miserable within 2 to 3 years, perhaps even less? And how many of those people who are actually maybe just living just about at poverty, finding themselves happier than most people who are multimillionaires? Today we'll be exploring this question in the book Engineering Happiness. It's a new approach for building a joyful life. And joining us here on the program today is the author Rakesh Sarin. He is a Payne Professor of Management at Anderson School of Management at the University of California in Los Angeles, and he's here to talk with us today how we can approach happiness and what it's all about. And I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Mr. Rakesh Sarin. Rakesh, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Daniel.
This is a great book. I mean, there are a lot of books out there that talk about happiness, that promise how you can get it. There's success, there's secrets, there's steps, blah, 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 blah. But you guys really approach this from a very practical, sort of almost a scientific way that makes more sense than almost anything I've ever read out there. Tell us how you got started with this.
Yeah, so we have been working on it for over 10 years.
10 years, okay.
Yes, and now we have so much data on happiness from all over the world that scientists have been collecting. And so we said that, of course, there is ancient wisdom and world's religion. This is a very old topic. So what we said to ourselves is, can we put all of the information and come up with some predictable laws on how happiness behaves? And so that is the outcome. The book is the outcome of that effort.
Mm-hmm. And what's fantastic about this is you don't have really, as I said, earlier in the program, you go to a self-help section or maybe a theological section, and people, they have those kinds of promises that make people feel, once I get this, once I read and do what's suggested to me in these books and practice these things, why don't I feel any happier? And at times, perhaps, I even feel less happy than I did before. And you really talk about why this really occurs.
Right. See, because we feel happiness is basically what we have control over is our choices. Mm-hmm. And happiness is a byproduct of the choices that we make in life. So the thing is, there cannot be a quick formula because everybody's life circumstance is different. But once one understands the process, what generates happiness, what are the triggers of happiness, and what are the traps of happiness, what laws govern. So then when we are making choices, we are more mindful. So you are right. We don't have a quick fix that here are 3 things you can do tomorrow and you will be happier. But hopefully we can suggest to the listeners that there are systematic ways, and then when you are making your life choices, you will be more mindful and make choices that will hopefully positively impact your happiness.
Now, you talk about how in one's lifetime that happiness pretty much has a U-shaped shape, if you will, almost like a smile, if, as you said in the book, if you're feeling optimistic. Right. But that you say that by the time a person approaches midlife, starting at about the age of 44, happiness begins to take a downward turn, but then it starts to pick back up past the age of 50. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, so you see, first let's just remind the listeners about the data that on an average, right? Not everybody, but on an average.
And this is all over the world, too. So.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you were saying this is also all over the world, so this is a good sample.
Right. So 50-year-olds are happier than 44-year-old, as you said. 60-year-olds are happier than 50 years old, and 70 years old. So that are happier than 60 years old. So that is a good news. And why does it happen? Data does not say that. Data simply reports what the findings are. And I can give you my conjecture would be that as we grow older, we become wiser and we begin to accept things and we begin to live in present. And when why 44 is the point of the lowest, maybe that is the time people have the most financial concerns, raising children, so there are also expectations that time are not managed well. So it could be a number of factors that are responsible for it. But the main point is if your health is good, and that is important, health has to be good because nobody can be happy if you are in pain. So if health is good, then it's a very good news. As we grow older, our happiness has a chance to even improve.
I know that I believe it was more than 10 years ago I was reading in a book which was authored by Deepak Chopra that there was a study done, and they said that most people felt, of course if you achieve this age, that being in their 60s, they said, were probably the happiest times of their lives.
Right.
And I think that if you talk with a lot of, especially Americans seems to have one of those biases about, well, if we're happy, then the rest of the world pretty much looks to our standard of that. And, well, if you'd traveled around the world, you'd realize, well, no, they're looking at us going, well, we don't understand why you think that's what makes you happy. But anyway, was saying that, compared to like, 20, 30, and 40-year-olds who would think, no, this is the happiest time of my life. But really, as you get to be 40 and 50 years old, I don't know how many people, especially, let's just say, in the United States, would love to go back and visit their 20s.
But, we don't have that luxury. I think the best way to look at happiness, frankly, is whatever is your circumstance, wherever you are in the world, you have to think you have a choice from now onwards to live a happier life. Mm-hmm. And some people have gone through, especially in this economic crisis, in a tough time, so it's true. But nevertheless, even in that circumstance, one has to say that how can I live rest of my life in a happier way? Because we cannot go back.
Of course not. Mm-hmm.
Right. So I let me explain to you a little bit our point of view. So our point of view is that we have to really understand this fundamental equation. It's a very simple equation, and many people can say, well, I could have thought of that myself, and that's a good thing. So it's commonsensical, but it is happiness equals reality minus shifting expectations.
Right.
So as we try to improve our reality by working harder so we can make more money, buy a bigger house, or drive a fancier car, our expectations also shift. So we are happy for a little while, but soon enough, expectations catch up with reality. So this is why this is no surprise that American millionaires living in huge luxurious houses are barely happier than Maasai warriors in Kenya who live in huts. So it's a tricky issue that if we simply think that more fame and more fortune could buy us happiness, it's not going to happen, or it will be temporary. Even if we do buy happiness, it will be very temporary because our expectations shift. Now, I can, in a way, if you look at a very big picture, that all of us who are living today in the United States, if happiness was absolute, then we should be all amazingly happy. Our happiness should be off the charts. Why? Because compared to our ancestors, we have so much more: running water, electricity, highways, cell phones, computers, but we have gotten accustomed to those privileges. So this equation it makes sense. It bears out in the empirical work and the scientific experiments that it is reality minus shifting expectations. So the question then we have to ask, what strategy can I use if that is the case, that I could be happier? And we can talk about some of those.
Now, I know that, as you use the comparison of the multimillionaire and the, huge home versus the Maasai warrior, is that what you say in the book is, to me, not only very interesting, but makes a lot of sense. Again, for the listeners out there in Engineering Happiness, this is a book that really seems to approach this, for lack of a better phrase, with common sense. It just, you realize as you're reading through this, you go, this just makes a lot of sense. But now in these two worlds, the multimillionaire or the Messiah warrior, or perhaps maybe even, the beggar in India, you say that if people meet all of their basic needs, that's food, shelter, and health, and of course good relationships, that really, if those are satisfied, that the degree of happiness doesn't increase all that much regardless of how much wealth you compound on top of that or even lack thereof.
Right. So I agree that the treasure of happiness is frankly is basic goods, what you call basic goods and what we call basic goods. Because again, if you look at the equation, for basic goods, first of all, we don't make social comparison. Mm-hmm. And also our expectations do not shift so much. So the simplest example is food. Every day you are hungry, then you enjoy your meal. But I don't get the same enjoyment with the cell phone. It is true if I leave it at home, I'll miss it. But it has become a necessity now. But basic goods are all around us. For example, we classify basic goods as needs of the body, and the needs of the mind, and the needs of the heart. So needs of the body and the needs of the heart are things like spending time with your friends and family members, people you love. And we can just see that we are very happy when we are having a good time with our friends and family members. Mm-hmm. And also listening to the music that we like. So these are the sorts of things that give us on a consistent basis, happiness. So that is actually indeed the first strategy, which is in our lives we ought to emphasizing basic goods, and too much material aspiration is toxic to happiness because the new aspirations arise, and therefore we have to work even harder and only to see that we are exactly in the same situation over again. So it is like an emotional global warming, frankly, and if we get used to consuming too much too soon, our future happiness is put at risk. Mm-hmm. And that is the problem. For example, the children of wealthy parents who are not able to keep up with the lifestyle they have always known. So we have to be careful. So we don't say that money is not important. Money is important to provide for your family and to have economic security. But beyond that, that's not the way to go. Mm-hmm. Right. So that is one strategy, but there are others to improve happiness.
Yeah, I was just remembering in the movie Wall Street, and this was the original 1980s version where Bud Fox is asking Gordon Gekko, how much is enough? I mean, how many yachts can you water ski behind, But I think when he was missing the point, it was just like in J.R. in the show Dallas with J.R. Ewing. I say, these people, money is just basically what you would call a measuring stick or a scorecard. To them, what kept them happy and compelled was the business and doing the business itself, and all the little intricacies and ways that you can screw and cheat other people. But that was who they were, But the bottom line is that money would never be enough because that wasn't how they measured what made them happy. It was the actual doing of what they did that achieved these things.
That's right. And I agree, because when we set goals, whatever they are, for these people in Wall Street was money and all that, but for other people it could be helping a charity, being involved in an environmental cause, or even a simple thing like exercise and losing weight. So when we are involved in something and making a gradual progress towards the goal, that's how we are happy. And that's when we say, oh, I didn't even notice the time. The time passed, right? Because we are living in the present.
Right.
So it is the idea is, it is not the height of the ladder that counts. It is that we ought to be climbing a ladder. And goal setting is a very good way because you are slowly making a progress towards that goal. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, in your book, Rakesh, you talk about what would be considered to be the 6 essential laws of happiness. And what I'd like to go is to go through each of those a little bit so people can see why winning a lottery won't necessarily make you happy, or that when you achieve whatever that thing is outside of you that you say to yourself, once I'm there, I will feel happy, or why that's fleeting and sometimes even non-existent. And the first one that you have, which is a notorious law that we seem to have here in the United States, and comparing this with other countries, that if people could hear this particular law and find a way to balance it in a very healthy way, would remove a lot of unhappiness, especially here in America, and that is relative comparison. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the relative comparison, what happens is that we are programmed to socially compare ourselves with our peer group. And in a way, it is not frankly that bad, because that's how we evaluate how well we are doing. But at some point it becomes toxic. If we begin to say, oh, neighbor has a BMW or a swimming pool, and in this way we create more problems for us. And sometimes we feel, oh, if I'm only on the top of the heap, then things will be fine. No, they won't be fine, because your heap will change. In fact, philosopher Russell said it very well. He said that if you desire glory, then you will envy Napoleon. But
right.
Napoleon envied Caesar, and Caesar envied Alexander, and Alexander envied Hercules, who never existed. So this game you cannot win. So we have to really search inside ourselves and try to derive joy in simple things in life, because these kinds of comparisons, unfortunately, they do have even biological consequences. In some animal studies, they have shown that in a social hierarchy for monkeys, the higher level monkey has more of a serotonin, neurotransmitter serotonin, which is associated with enhanced feelings of well-being. But when that monkey is removed, then its serotonin level drops, and curiously, another monkey who becomes the so-called head of the group, its serotonin level rises. But as human beings, we can make choices. Mm-hmm. We don't have to play that game.
I know. You actually give a great example, too, in comparison with others, where there was a tendency to feel superior, and so you presented two worlds. In World A, your current yearly income is $50,000, and the others earn $25,000. So other people would be earning half of what you earn in World A. Now, in World B, your current income would be $100,000, while everyone else earns $200,000. And people chose that they would rather have half of the income of $100,000 because they would be superior to the rest of everyone else.
Right.
What is that just an instinct, a human need to be in that position, or is that a condition?
Right. I think it's an instinct, but you see, this is the way, Daniel, I feel about it, that certain feelings are very easy to come up. Envy is one such. But we as human beings also have some deep feelings which are dormant, and we have to work on it to bring them to surface. So an antidote for envy is what is called in Buddhism, but other religions may have different names for it, called mudita, which means that you take joy in others' successes. Envy means that you feel depressed if others are success, and you take joy in others' failure, or schadenfreude. But mudita says, and we have all that capability, because we take joy in our children's success. Sometimes we take joy if our home team is winning. So we can develop it. And imagine, if we are able to develop mudita, then we have an infinite spring of happiness, because we are taking joy in successes all around us, not just our own success. Mm-hmm. And envy is very bad, because what happens is you could be successful and you say, I'm better than X, but then somebody else will be better than you.
Oh, yeah.
And so we put ourselves in this trap. In which we cannot be a winner. Right. So even if I agree that envy is easy to come, but we can control, and we can develop compassion, what I call mudita, meaning taking joy in others' success. Yes.
Mm-hmm. I know when I was reflecting on my time in high school when I played a year in the junior varsity football team, is that our team actually lost every game but one, and the one game we did win was against a team that didn't win any games against anybody.
Yes.
And even my brothers would say, my family, well, why do you keep going and playing if you guys are always going to lose it? I said, well, because I enjoy playing the game. I like the position that I play, and I do the best that I can do while I'm out there.
Exactly.
It's also up for the rest of the team to be able to jump in, too. No, it doesn't feel good when you get, a 65-0 point loss, but you've got to get the rest of the team going here in the meantime. So
right.
Now, one of the things I wanted to touch on here, because I thought this was an important point in this area of relative comparison, is you used the word Schadenfreude, excuse me, and I found that interesting because just recently I was interviewing with someone who's been studying neuroscience and the workings of the brain for many years, was a lie detection expert, and talks about how subliminally we become, we move into directions sometimes that we make a lot of decisions from the subconscious, but on a conscious level we think we're actually making that decision. But one of the things they did, or he did, was he conducted experiments at the Utah State Penitentiary, in effect to help to see if subliminals would actually make the inmates feel better. Now, what he found, what was interesting in this particular study, and that this happened in prisons pretty much probably anywhere in the world, but in this particular state, was that most of the time, or all the time, people in prison tend to blame. So they tried a forgiveness experiment, which removes this.
Right.
Now, that being said, he says what he found interesting is when a person is in prison, they're already feeling miserable, they're already feeling low, no self-esteem, whatever the case is. And what they try to do in context of the Schadenfreude, which is, the idea that I'm miserable, but if I can make you more miserable, then I'm going to feel better. Is that a natural trait of people?
Well, but okay, but I still feel Schadenfreude is a form of an envy, and that is not a recipe to be joyful in a consistent way, because there is a side effect. Yes, at that point in moment, you will feel happy because somebody is more miserable than you are. But by the same token, when you will look the other way and then somebody is enjoying and having a more success than you, then you will feel miserable, right? So we ought to change that mindset. and we begin to see, they find, for example, when people help others, same areas of our brain light up as when we get a reward. You see, so helping others, having compassion, these are the ways that will give us consistent happiness, because we cannot go wrong there. Mm-hmm. Whereas the other way, yes, you could be temporarily happy because you did better than somebody else, and you are taking a joy in that, and then so it does not mean if you do well something you shouldn't take a joy. Yes, you should, but that is because you did it.
Right.
It's not always has to be somebody else who is miserable or who does less well.
That particular part, when I was reading that, I had been actually talking with, for instance, my wife and other people about this. That, for instance, in America, back to the Schadenfreude and the Madita, as you were talking about, was the idea that, for instance, in America, we love to celebrate our heroes. Right. Now, we take a look at people, for instance, like Mike Tyson and Tiger Woods, right, maybe even Britney Spears, okay? These are people that achieved phenomenal levels of success in their fields. Right. But we couldn't wait, for some strange reason, for these people to be toppled. And then once they did see, now we wonder, is it the toppling itself, or finally did we feel, okay, they're human again, they're just as fallible as I am, great, I'm glad they're suffering, but then we put a moral compass on top of them to basically rationalize the fact that we're really enjoying for the moment that they're feeling miserable, that they are suffering probably as bad as we are. And then you turn around and then you celebrate when they can pull themselves up through the ashes and become successful again. It's like, what kind of nonsensical thinking is that?
Right. So, like you said in this example, we have both. We take joy when somebody who is down and comes up, and we take also joy when somebody, stumbles.
Right.
And I would say that taking joy in other successes and having compassion for other people is a better way. It makes us calmer and makes us enjoy life more.
hmm Now, because there's been so much about the talk of the power of intention, the law of attraction, and relative comparison, you can see now how a person, when they do that to the point that they feel the envy and they feel the negative vibration of the success of others and want that for themselves, that you actually give some nice, I guess, call them cures, if you will, on how a person can balance this relative comparison and feel to themselves, where I'm at is okay. And I'd like to talk about just two of these. One is acts of kindness, and the other is cultivate an attitude of admiration.
Right.
Now, I realized that when I had implemented that, and before I actually read this book, that actually soothes a lot of that anxiety that I might feel when I'm looking at my neighbor and going, how come things are working out better for him than they are for me, sort of thing. Talk about, like, for instance, in those two realms, acts of kindness and the attitude of admiration, why this helps taper this anxiety of comparison off.
Right, because you see, when you have an admiration, an attitude of admiration, and that frankly comes about because I have thought about this issue that how do we fight envy? How do we reduce envy? Well, that means that we ought to develop compassion. How do we develop compassion? When you go back and back and back, it all comes down to that we should really learn to love. And that is, I know that sounds like, something from some religious book, and it could be, but it is true because our laws, if you try to peel them and peel them and peel them, how do I do that? How do I do that? That becomes the bottom line, because when we learn to love, then a lot of these negative emotions go away, and we begin to cultivate positive emotions.
Mm-hmm.
You see, so in our scheme, because it is an engineering approach, meaning what we say is that you cannot buy happiness, but you can engineer it. And so we have a precise measure, which is the sum total of positive and negative states of mind, emotions, and feelings, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then the idea becomes very simple, which is that how do we increase the positive, the duration and frequency of positive emotions, and reduce the negative? And so this is where the idea of cultivating admiration, compassion, learning to love, because these things down-regulate negative emotion. They reduce those. They might not turn always negative into positive, but they turn a big negative into less negative, and then positive becomes more frequent in our life. But it requires a lot of practice, and so that's why we give 13 pillars of happiness along the lines of Benjamin Franklin's ideas of cultivating virtues. So these are the things that we have to practice. So I feel that when we think of this happiness, what we call happiness seismogram, because you see, in order to make improvement, you have to have precise units. So like energy is measured by calories, we measure happiness by happydons. And happydons is made up unit, but now there is a lot of research, including neuroimaging, by which they can measure happiness. In 5 years or so, I will not be surprised that there will be some handheld device that may be measuring emotional well-being on a daily basis of people. So if we take the view that we want to improve the positive part, then we have to know why are positive emotions created, when are negative emotions created. And our laws help you see that. Mm-hmm. And once you see that, then you begin to slowly work on it. My administrative assistant said after he read the book, he used to hate his morning commute. Los Angeles, it's very difficult. And now he says he enjoys it. Now, I found it very surprising. I thought he was going to say that he hates it less, but he enjoys it because he begins to focus for example, he drives on what we call Sunset Boulevard. It's a long boulevard, but he begins to look at trees and flowers and homes and things like that. So he, rather than always complaining about the guy ahead, he is diverting his mind to something else. So that is the way to cultivate positive emotions over time. So I think that we all have capability of improving our happiness, and we don't accept the view which has some truism to it, that happiness is like a pendulum. Some days you are happy, some days you are not, and you cannot do much to change that. And that's why one scientist said trying to be happier is as futile as trying to be taller. We disagree with it. What we say is that there are two sides of the equation. That it is like a sailboat in our mind. That is, wind and ocean currents influence the movement, but you have the control of the rudder. And if you don't exercise the control, your sailboat will drift. And these laws of happiness and engineering happiness is about making choices like controlling the rudder, so we move toward a happier destination.
And I found what was powerful, too, when you talk about, for instance, that you take joy in someone else's good. You take a lot of joy in someone else's successes instead of being miserable and down about it. Back to the power of attraction and the law of intention is you begin to send that vibration out consistently saying, I believe this makes me happy because I'm happy for this person. I think you'll begin to see that more often in your life than saying, God, it stinks this person here, gets all the luck and blah, 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 and I don't get any. See? The law of attraction does just that. It attracts exactly what it is you want.
Right.
And if it's misery, you're going to get plenty of it.
You're right. And also, it is also, in a way, I don't know, contagious is not the right word, but something like that. That means if you begin to take joy in your colleagues or co-workers or friends' success, then that person begins to behave that way with you, and you actually improve happiness for everybody around you. There is something about, you see in children, you see very clearly that little child, when one child starts laughing, all others start laughing. One starts crying, they cry in unison almost. Now, as adults, we are not quite that extreme, but actually, frankly, we are like that. If we are around miserable people who are always hyper-competitive, some degree of competition is good, and are always having envy, then we become like that. So we ought to be the source to spread this positive message, and then other people will join in.
Yeah, I know that we'd spent quite a bit of time on the comparison, but that's kind of one of the biggest ones that, boy, if you could work on just that alone, these other ones actually start falling into place, to me, relatively easy. Now, the next one is the motion of expectation. Now, I found that one kind of unique because there are times that when we're about to do something, or we might go out because there's this thing that we want to buy and have in our lives, whatever it may be, that once we achieve it, it seems like, oh man, this just isn't what I thought it was. So then you think the best thing to be able to deal with that is, well, maybe from now on I'm just going to lower my expectation of an outcome. My attitude of that wasn't so much that you have an expectation, but in as much as allow it to be what it will, and then kind of go with it. And I found that it isn't like saying that you don't have expectation.
No,
what it's saying is you kind of put that aside and just allow what it is to be. And I found that I get extremely happy, and I'm rarely disappointed regardless. And now expectation, though, as you said, on the way up, it works pretty well, but also on the way down it works pretty well, too. That's kind of an interesting paradox.
Right. So this law of motion of expectations, first of all, I can relate with my own life. I was in engineering college, and I was riding a bicycle with my friends to see a movie because engineering college was outside the town, and we will ride 10, 15 miles, and we were very happy. And then when I came to do my PhD at UCLA, I bought a very old car, which once in a while may not reverse, so you could see the parking problem. Next morning it may not reverse. But nevertheless, I was happy with that, and now I have a better